Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of my Amendment 27, which gives rural airports in my district the flexibility they need to serve their passengers, maintain their workforce, and remain solvent. Our local airports in Sioux City, Iowa, Fort Dodge, Iowa, and many other locations connect Iowans to the rest of our country and to the world. We cannot allow government mandates to suffocate our rural communities and threaten the existence of our small airports. Under current law, rural airports provide the staff they need to keep our passengers safe. Injecting the federal government into hiring decisions would only make rural communities harder to reach. By giving our local airports breathing room to manage their budgets and their operations, they can better hire new employees and keep costs low for passengers. Born and raised in rural Iowa, I know that our rural airports are important to our economic development across the Midwest. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and with that, I simply yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve?
Yes.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. So this amendment, which would create an exemption for non-hub airports from the requirement to have at least one individual who maintains certification as an emergency medical technician or an EMT during carrier operations, is the amendment that I oppose. This amendment poses a safety risk that would be detrimental to passengers. Unlike what the proponent, Mr. Speaker, what the proponent said is that this is the federal government imposing an employment requirement on airports. This is actually a single safety standard that applies to all airports, that there be a certified emergency technician to respond to emergencies at all airports. It is indeed a national standard, but one done for safety, especially in support of especially in support of airports that have passengers on air carrier operations. In the event of a medical emergency that occurs at the airport or on a flight, passengers and airport workers should receive care as quickly as possible, regardless of where they're flying to. Having an EMT available at the airport could mean the difference between life and death in the event of an emergency. All passengers should be reassured that even if they're traveling out of or through a non-hub airport, they have the same safety precautions at that airport as they do at all airports in the United States. So for those reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington reserves. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentleman's prepared to close. The gentleman reserves.
Yeah.
Gentleman from Washington.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm confused. Do we have the right to close, or does the proponent have the right to close?
The gentleman from Washington has the right to close.
Okay, then I reserve. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Yeah. I just urge my colleagues to think through this great amendment. You think about these small airports and the burden that this would project on each one of these airports, to have a special person that handles just the concerns of things that might happen once every 10 years or whatever it might be. There's people that are already hired that can handle these situations. And again, these small rural airports cannot be like the large urban airports. It just doesn't work that way. So with that, I yield back, and I close the rest of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa yields. The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Yeah, thank you. As a member of Congress who represents several small rural airports, including ones that are isolated on islands, I appreciate the argument that the gentleman from Iowa has been making, very much so. And yet, given the fact that I have a district with some of the same circumstances, even airports that are isolated on islands, we still believe there that we need EMTs available in the event of emergencies at these non-hub airports. And so we want one safety standard for the country, and I would ask folks to oppose this amendment. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.